What's up, everybody? Just wanted to give you a heads up. This episode was really fun to make, but we had nothing but technical difficulties, so the audio is a little weird. My voice is very loud, while his Fwah's is not as loud, and hopefully that's okay. Hopefully you guys can still get something out of it and enjoy it. And yeah, without further ado, it was a great conversation Fwah and I had about story, and yeah, without further ado, let's get into it.
Donkey Job Projects.
But yeah, just so everybody knows, I'm speaking to Fwah Storm, and Fwah Storm is one of the people who has contributed or been a part of the 100 Days of Making Comics, and also taken part recently in Art Sound Off, which is really cool. It's cool that some of my peers maybe are trying some of this stuff out who maybe weren't so much into it, so that's really neat. And I just wanted to ask you, where can people find you right out the gate?
Right out the gate, you can find my website, which is fwahstorm.co.uk. I'm trying to get as much stuff on there as possible throughout this year, and I'm either going to succeed or fail. It'll be interesting to watch either way. YouTube, I'm on YouTube way too much, probably. And you can find me on Facebook. You just type in Fwah Storm, you'll find me there, and Instagram as well.
Cool. Well, we'll definitely have links for the regular website and YouTube on the podcast. But yeah, especially because you actually have 2 channels on YouTube, don't you?
Yes. I have a second channel that's like dedicated to movies, especially trashy horror movies and exploitation flicks and stuff. I haven't used that channel in a while, but I have a plan. I have some ideas involving sock puppets and I've already said too much.
Wow, interesting. So that combination, I'm a little bit afraid.
You should be.
Awesome. All right. So, we're talking about story. I'm definitely interested after hearing what you were saying earlier. What it seems like, and it's hard for me to tell because you kind of took all your comics off of your website.
Yeah.
And then maybe I know you keep talking about you're working on it, so I'm not quite sure 100%, but just from the descriptions of what you're talking about with developing this new story and stuff, you definitely tend to go in a pretty dark realm with your stories that I can tell.
Yeah, I do tend to delve into the darker, more mature reader kind of stuff. I have the odd moment where I will do something that's more comical or more suitable for a younger audience. I mean, I'm trying to think of the right word. I have a few diplomas under my belt, which is something that I don't normally go out there and advertise. I have one in grammar, which is hysterical whenever you read any of my first drafts. It's really hard to believe that I have a diploma in grammar. I also have a diploma in English, obviously, and I have a diploma in writing children's books.
Wow.
Which, when you read my stories, it's like, really? How is this possible? And why don't you write children's books? And yeah, like I was saying to you earlier, just from certain life experiences I've had, I think they've definitely bled into my stories. And I kind of take that approach. It wasn't Mark Twain that said it, but a lot of people often say that it was Mark Twain who said this. But I do take the approach of writing is easy. You just walk up to the page and you bleed. And that's where your story comes from. And because of that, I do tend to sit there and I can come up with a very romantic story if I want to, but I'll sit there for ages and go, something's not right, no one died, no one's been beaten. the language is way too nice. Something's got to change here, and then it does kind of tread into a little bit of a nightmarish world.
Interesting.
And I did that with earlier comics as well, because like you pointed out, I've taken most of them down and removed them from the shelves, for want of a better phrasing. And that was mostly because of life experiences. Once again, I went through something a few years back that it really debilitated me for quite a long time. There was legal stuff going on I had to take care of, and people just being dicks. That's the easiest way I can describe it. And it put me into a place, a very dark, depressing place, where I found it so hard to work. I couldn't write a story for love nor money. A lot of the time I was waking up and being like, oh fuck, I woke up. That's the sort of mindset I was in. It was a very dark time for me, and that led me to going, well, hold on, there's been such a long time since I last did something. If I did manage to do something now, it would be as if it was from two different people, and there's so much that I still want to finish, and I'm learning new skills when it comes to creating and stuff. So I took it all down and was like, I can start again. So why don't I just do that? I'll just start again. And I ended up sitting down and writing a sequel to a book that had already been published called The Fallen. And The Fallen was a book, just like a little novella, that originally was meant to be a graphic novel. And I knew it would take me years to draw it, and I didn't want to take up so much time on just one project. So I decided to write a novel of it first, and thought to myself, later on I can always do it as a graphic novel. And that was a darkish story, but it still had moments of levity and stuff. And I came to the second book, and I was like, you know what? I need to get everything off my chest. And I took just a few seconds to say to myself, people are going to hate this book. No one's going to like it. They're going to get to the end of it and go, this is really messed up. But it's not about writing it for everyone else. It's about writing it for you. So I sat down and wrote the book that I wanted to write. And it was as if a tap had been turned on. And all of a sudden it was like, I can't stop creating. I can't stop writing again. This is exactly where I was before. So I got back to that original place. And I was like, I could put everything back up, but I think it's better to just sit back and go, you've got a fresh start. Not everyone gets a fresh start, so take it and fucking run with it.
Wow. And how long ago was this?
Oh, this was back in about 2014.
Okay.
So, kind of recent, but kind of not, if that makes sense. And
when did you start going back to comics, or was this a new thing after that?
It was shortly after that I started going back to comics. I started looking at the projects that I had started and was like, man, it's a shame that this never got finished. And I started going back through like emails and stuff that I got from people who had read books like that I had done, like Jericho and Unity, and they were all just like, we're still here, we're still waiting, because this is awesome. And it was just so nice to read that from people. I mean, yeah, I'm sure some of them are friends who are just being nice, but some of them were complete strangers from across the pond on the other side of the world. In fact, with Jericho, I got an email from this particularly young lad in the United States who had been diagnosed with testicular cancer. And he was telling me that he really didn't want to carry on life after the diagnosis. The thought of carrying on life and going through the treatments and everything absolutely terrified him, and he was contemplating just giving up, not taking his own life, just letting things happen. And then he picked up the first issue of Jericho, read it, and he came back and was like, why should I give up? And he was explaining to me that the doctors had given him, it was something like a year to live, if he had gone through the treatments and stuff. And he thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a go anyway. And 2 years later, he got back in touch with me saying, I'm in remission, I'm not dead yet. And
Wow.
he wouldn't have done it if he hadn't have read one of my books, which was such a moving thing to hear. So
Yeah,
it was
absolutely.
it was rereading things like that and going back through all these things and remembering what the reaction was like. I mean, whenever I work on a book or a comic, it's no offense to anyone else, but my first port of call is I've got to be happy with it. Because why the hell would I want to give you a book of mine and say, I've spent 3 months on this and I hate it? It just doesn't make sense to me. So I always take that attitude of, you know what, someone's going to love it, someone's going to hate it. It's about how you feel about it. And I just started getting back into that swing of things, going, okay, let's pick up pencil and paper again. And it was very shortly after that I was like, you know what, I need to speed up my process. I've never had much luck with digital, but I'll give it a go again, see if I can learn to love it. And now you can't get me away from illustrating digitally. It's such a complete turnaround.
Wow.
And it just made all these plans and ideas come together, and I just said to myself, one way or another, I've got to do this, even if it takes like decades before one single comic book page is out there. I've still got to do it. But luckily, it hasn't taken decades.
Well, with a quick Google search, I'm finding your book, Jericho.
Oh, I hate to think what that stuff must look like now. Must be such a huge contrast.
When did you do this?
Jericho was around 2011, 2012.
Yeah, it says 2011, yeah. Cool. Yeah, so there's something I can read. But maybe you don't want me to read it.
wait for the newly illustrated stuff. That'll be much better.
Yeah. How about did you ever print it, or?
Oh yeah, Jericho went into print. The first issue was a limited run of 100 copies. Each one was hand numbered, and it sold out within 24 hours.
Okay. Oh wow, nice.
Yeah. So we then did like an alternative cover.
Yep.
And that got to something like 8,000 copies sold or something like that, which, you know, when you talk to people who work at like Marvel and Image and all that, that's nothing. That amount of copies, that's not good. But for someone like me doing it independently, it was pretty impressive, and a lot of it was just luck and taking the attitude at conventions of, I'm not going to ask for money for it, I'm just going to stick it out and go, this is free, who wants it?
Yeah.
Which actually worked in my favour, I think.
Yeah. I think it's a good way to try things out, you know, get people reading something, and
yeah.
I don't have a problem. I think you even mentioned, you were talking in one of your videos that you used to not be interested in giving anything away for free, but then kind of changed.
Yeah, well, I started giving stuff out for free because I had spent time at a couple of conventions where I had all the issues laid out on this table, and people would look at it, but they wouldn't touch it, and I had no idea why. They'd just stare at it from a distance. And I thought to myself, you know what, I'm just going to hand it out for free. So I'd hand out the first issue for free, and then people would go away, read it, come back, and either say, this is shit, why did you give me this? Or they would buy the other issues. I did a convention in London where I did that, and some girl, I say some girl, I know who they are now, but some girl came along and was like, okay, yeah, you know, I'll take the first issue, and they flicked through it, and they really enjoyed it, and then they came back, and it was the girlfriend of Sean Schemmel, who voices Goku from Dragon Ball Z.
Oh, wow.
So he came back and said, yeah, my girlfriend loves this, how much for the rest? And I was just like, I can't believe this is happening right now. And
that's cool.
And then I had loads of people, especially some who were very close to me, who were like, you've got to stop giving stuff out for free. You've got to stop it. You're losing money. And I'd be like, well, how can I lose money that I don't have? Because until they put it in my hands, I don't have that money, so you'll have to elaborate. And they would constantly go on about it, and I thought, maybe they're right. I'll give it a go. So for about a year, maybe a little longer, maybe a little less, I started going, okay, nothing's free. If someone wants it, they got to pay for it.
Right.
And I made no money from it whatsoever. And I also had no one reading the books, no one giving a damn, no one caring. And I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to go back to giving stuff out for free.
Yeah. No, it's interesting though. I think it's worthwhile.
Absolutely.
I don't know. It really depends, I guess, and it's a personal choice. But yeah, I don't know. I think sometimes people are a little more down on it than they really need to be.
Yeah, I think so too.
So cool. Well, so you've kind of already answered like where you kind of like what your motivation sort of is for writing stories, or what kind of where it comes from and stuff. But I wanted to talk about approaching comic stories and kind of structure and all that. You recently put out a video. I think it was like your third or fourth writing video, where you talked a lot about the structure. I actually missed it and didn't realize it. I'm glad I went back through your archives. And I thought it was interesting. You kind of brought out a few different ways to structure a story initially. I'd be curious to hear like how you approach a story once you kind of have like the seed of an idea.
I think it all depends on how big the seed is and how much I've let it grow up here first.
Yeah.
Because I always feel like there should be a standard method that you can just walk into, and that should help you structure the story and let it grow and everything. But sometimes you'll approach certain story ideas and you'll try a method that you've used with another book that worked on another book, and then you try it with this one idea and you can't get it to work. And it's not a problem with the idea itself, it's just it's not the right method. So I've actually been looking into, in my own time, looking into monomyths, because monomyths, there are so many different types of monomyths. And for anyone who's listening who doesn't know what a monomyth is, back in it was either the 50s or 60s, I believe, a guy called Joseph Campbell created the very first monomyth, because he had gone through all these books and all these films and TV shows, and he had this theory that every story was the same. So he created what he called the monomyth, which is more commonly known as the hero's journey. And it was 17 steps that every story has, like the setup of the character, the world that they live in, a call to adventure, leaving their ordinary world, whether it be in a mental sense or a physical sense, and entering an adventure world and going on this epic journey. And since then, there have been 3 or 4 other people who have developed their own version of the monomyth. Some are shorter, some are longer. And the one that I mentioned in my video was the Story Embryo by Dan Harmon, which he uses for every episode of Rick and Morty. And it's just an 8-step cycle that helps a story progress. And I found it interesting how something like a story embryo, if you've got the right idea, you can use it very early on just to develop the plot, but then you can still adapt what you've got from the story embryo and place it inside of a monomyth. My only issue with monomyths is it neglects character arcs. It only allows for one type of character arc, but there's no real focus on the character arc. So I started looking into, is there a way of creating a kind of super monomyth that incorporates many different plot points from other monomyths, as well as plot points for different character arcs that you can change for depending on whether you want a character to fail or succeed, whether they're the good guy or the bad guy. You can interchange those certain plot points and stuff. And it's a difficult thing to try and do that, but I've found it to be so worth it, because instead of keeping the idea in my head and trying to piece together scenes and then just pantsing my way through a script like I used to do, I now take that time to sit down and I literally take that seed of an idea, and that seed of an idea could be anything, absolutely anything, because I think another thing that a lot of writers get hung up on is it's got to be perfect from word go, and that's not true. If it was perfect from word go, you wouldn't need structure, you wouldn't need to worry about character arc or anything like that. You would have written it.
Right.
So let's take an example, like I've got a couple of characters called Skin and Bones, and the idea behind Skin and Bones is so simple. That little germ of an idea is this: 2 superpowered serial killers looking for their missing gimp. That's it. Literally start with that. And then I think about the plot, because it's impossible to have a story without a plot, which is a controversial thing to say. I've met many people who, you know, they've watched a movie or whatever, and they've gone, "Oh, that movie had no plot." And I'm like, but you watched a movie, you saw a story. It's impossible for you to see something that doesn't have a plot. And I developed that plot using the lock system, which is something that I only started using recently because I was speaking to a friend about scene structure and saying how important scene structure is. And he told me about the lock system. And it made me go, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound like you can make scenes move on and make the story progress. And I looked into it, and it was created by a guy called James Scott Bell. And he used it to develop plot. And I was like, right, that makes sense. It doesn't work for a scene, it's just for plot. And it really does cover the basics of what a plot is. And for anyone who wants to know a little bit more about the lock system, it's very simple. L stands for lead, O stands for objective, C stands for conflict, and K stands for knockout. So the idea is, each letter is dedicated to a different act of the story. Now, the problem is you've got 2 letters for Act 2, so you have to divide Act 2 in half. So your first act is focused on introducing the lead of the story, introducing their ordinary world, giving people a reason to connect to that lead character. So you focus on that for your first act. The objective is then, well, what do they want? And you better make sure it's something that they can't walk away from. And you focus on that in the first half of the second act, and then you follow through until you've done the whole word lock. And then I would take whatever I've developed from the lock system and then plant that in a story embryo, which is, to me, I understand why Dan Harmon uses it to structure a whole story.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of problems using it to structure a whole story. A lot of empty space that you are then stuck with your same problem of, well, where does it go? What direction am I meant to take this? So I would use it to kind of just add a little bit more detail to the plot. And then I would sit down and I would get out a map of a monomyth. I tend to sway more towards like Christopher Vogler's monomyth. I think that's the easier one to use and the most effective one to use. And I would literally take what I've written down for the 8 points of the story embryo and then stick it into the monomyth, then start thinking about character arcs and stuff. And then eventually you've got this story, and then comes the biggest problem, your biggest challenge. How are you going to make that fit into 24 pages? Because with a novel, or even a short prose story, it's easy. Once you've got to that point, you're like, well, I just need to structure the sentences and the paragraphs and all that. Just write down what I'm feeling with this story.
Yeah.
But when you've got a limit of how many pages it's got to be drawn in, how many panels you've got to draw it in, oh, you better be prepared to cut some stuff out of your story.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds complicated,
It
to
does
be
sound
honest.
complicated. It
But
does
at the
sound
same time, I mean, writing a story is complicated, no matter how you really cut it. So,
Oh, absolutely. Telling a story is like juggling, because you've got to remember so much stuff that really does. If you're not in the right mindset, it's going to scramble your brain. Try and
Yeah.
remember to keep hold of a character arc for your protagonist, a character arc for your antagonist, and do you need one for your sidekick, or are they too small a character? And it can be very challenging. And it's like anything else, you've just got to take it one step at a time. I mean, I see so many new writers who are so passionate to start telling their story in comics or animation or in novels. And they want to know everything. And they want to use all that information all at the same time, because they've got this big, epic story that they want to tell that's going to go on for like 10 years. And I have to remind them, it's like, look, it's good that you've got this big idea and you're really passionate about it. But please start small. Start with that tiny little story. Especially when you're doing comics, if you can sit down and do a 4-page comic book story and just progress from there, then you don't need to worry too much about your character arcs. You don't need to worry too much about a monomyth or anything. You just need to worry about your plot and your characters, and just the main thing is have fun. Have fun telling that story. These are all tools that we can use at any point. If you're writing something big, then yeah, you're going to need to pull out all these complicated tools and use them as effectively as possible. But it's just best to start small and let it grow from there.
yeah, it's interesting. I would recommend the same thing, and that's kind of the approach I've taken. And it's grown incrementally. Like my first comic, I've said this before many times, but like my first comic was just one setting, 2 characters, plot. Like this, and this happens. I barely wrote a script or anything. I just kind of had a basic plot in mind. I kind of thumbnailed it out, and then, after I drew it, did all that stuff. Then I wrote the dialogue after, kind of. I had a few dialogue notes, and that was it. And, it was kind of a hero character meets a bad guy, and fights him, the typical comic book story. That's how I started. And then each mini comic I did after that, I added, a couple characters, a couple more settings. And then, the next one, I was like, okay, let me try to give these characters a little more personality. Okay, so that, and then like now I'm like, okay, now I want to try to inject, themes and meaning into the story, so that's kind of where I'm at now, and each one you have to kind of build up incrementally. And if you're sitting here and you've had this like epic idea in your mind for your whole life since you were a kid, I want to make the next Star Wars, you can do that.
Yeah,
and some people would recommend go ahead, and do that. But I mean, more often than not, I feel like you're probably going to come away pretty disappointed and maybe give up. And I would hate to see that happen,
Well, I mean, when a carpenter starts learning to make stuff out of wood, they don't start with a dining set. They start with, can I make a box? Yes.
Yeah.
I've now learned how to make a box. Now let's make something a little bit bigger. Maybe a toy car, maybe a chair, maybe a small little fold-up table or something. But they don't start with a massive dining set or a gazebo or anything like that. So it's the same. I recommend the same with writers. I mean, it's so lovely seeing the passion in the storytellers out there and hearing their ideas. But I never want to fan out the flames of their passion, because that's such an important part of storytelling, is the passion you have for your characters and your story. But you have to take that moment and go, look, dude, please start small. Start ever so tiny. Start with something that's just a few pages long. Start writing a prose short story, because you've only got a couple of thousand words you can use. Literally just put it in one location. No more than one scene, and just see how you get on from there, because it's the easiest way to spot what you're already good at and what you need improvement on.
Yep. Yeah, and it's just like you have to. The thing is, like, if you're drawing comics, you know this already. Unless you're just a writer, but like, if you don't like go and say, okay, I'm going to like draw, Watchmen, and you still haven't, figured out how to like draw people like in proportion, or like you if you're drawing like the way, most kids draw when they're like, in elementary school, you don't try to make your great graphic novel. So why would you do that with story,
Yeah. Plus, if you think to yourself, I've got this huge epic 12-volume story, and each volume's got like 6 issues to it, and each issue is 24 pages or whatever, and I'm going to do that first. I'm going to start there because that's my masterpiece. Well, once you've finished it, where do you go from there? If you start at the top, where do you go?
Yeah,
it's like when people submit to publishers, I always recommend that you go out there, you get a list of the publishers who are accepting submissions, and you rank them. Obviously, you'll have Marvel and DC and Image right at the top. And then at the bottom, you're going to have some guy in his bedroom, probably with his dog, who's decided, I'm going to start a printing thing. And they're at the bottom, and everything else is in the middle. Start with that one guy in his room, because if you can't impress him, how the hell are you meant to impress the editors at Marvel or DC? Because everyone wants to go straight to Marvel or DC or 2000 AD, and they don't realize that's when you've arrived. But you can't arrive at your destination if you don't do the journey first. So it's the same thing with story. You've got to start in that small place and then arrive at your destination where you get to go, I did it, I finally did it after all these years. Here is my magnus opus, and everyone hates it.
Yeah, that's the thing too. Is like, will anybody even like it?
Yeah. Well, look, it's one of the best questions to ask yourself, and I don't mean it in like a cynical or self-deprecating sort of way, but just a general question is, why should anyone care? When I create a story or a character, why should I expect you to care? I mean, I've known you for a little while now, but why should I expect you to care?
Yeah.
Why should I expect my mother, who's known me all of my life at least, why should I expect her to care if I turn around and say, I've got this new character and it's like this? You got to take that time, learn how to develop your characters, how to make them withstand a small story as well as a big story. Because like you said, it all sounds complicated, because it kind of is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the easiest way to stop something complicated, start small.
Yeah. And when you do bring it to your mother and you're like showing her and getting all excited, and they're like, oh, wow, that's nice. You're very talented, and you get that response,
Yeah, you're either
then you realize, okay, no, even your mom probably isn't going to care because they're not into comics or whatever.
Well, you're either going to get that response of, this is my friend, or this is my son, this is my nephew, my brother, whatever. I better be nice about it. I don't think it's any good, but I better be nice about it, which is understandable. It's good intentions at the end of the day. Or you're going to get the opposite reaction of, I am so ashamed that I created you, that I gave you life. How do you manage to use the C word as a verb? I mean, this is just crude and crass.
Nice, yeah.
It's a 50-50, really. Like, but your best bet
funny.
is always the people you don't know. They're the people who are going to be so honest with you, because they've got no reason to lie. They don't care about your feelings. And if they don't like it, they'll tell you. And one of the first things they will most likely say if they don't like it is, I don't care. You gave me no reason to care.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I said
So,
to you... Sorry, you first.
Say it.
I was going to
No, go ahead.
Well, last time that we spoke, before doing this podcast, I said to you, that's why with the 3-act structure, I don't like to look at it as Act 1, beginning, Act 2, middle, Act 3, end. I prefer to look at it as pity, fear, and catharsis. Because if you look at it like that, you're naturally teaching yourself to, in that very first act, make sure there's a reason to... If we can pity at least one character in the first act, no matter how much we pity them, we start to connect with them. We start to have a reason to care. Because the only reason we would ever pity a character, which isn't a nice thing to do, really, but the only reason we would pity them is because we see potential in them. We see a reason to want them to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, another way to put it is you could probably replace the word pity with empathize.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's, it sounds a little less like, a mean thing or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was talking to someone about this on Skype a little while back, saying, look, you take pity, fear, and catharsis, or empathize, fear, and catharsis, and you can literally put that to any story, whether it be film, TV, book, and it will work. You've seen it a million times over. And he said, all right, prove it. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I said, perfect. You've been introduced to these two metalheads who can't play their instruments for love nor money, but they've got the passion and they're the best of friends, and they honestly believe that with the right training they could become the best band in the world. But you pity them because they're failing history, and if they fail history, one of them's going to military school, and that friendship's broken up. Do you remember that time when you had a friend that you didn't want the friendship to broken up, and it broke up? Heartbreaking. So you know what it's like to go through that. So you've pitied them in the first act. Fear comes at that perfect point when they realise that the antenna to the phone booth is broken, and they've got all these historical figures, and they're like, oh no, are we going to make it back in time? We might still flunk. And you fear for them. Can they make it home? And then catharsis, they get on that stage and they rock out with all these historical figures, and they pass. Oh, yes, Wild Stallions rule. Pity, fear, and catharsis.
Excellent. Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. I love that you put that together like that. That's interesting. So, wow, that's kind of, it's like funny because you're talking about, okay, we're going to get these monomyths, and then the story and embryo, get the lock system, put these scenes together, put this in there and put that back in there, and go back and forth. But then you can kind of break it right down to that whole pity, fear, catharsis thing. Like that's kind of the core of it, from your standpoint, from what I can see.
Yeah, it's, to me, when you start with the plot, you're looking at the bigger picture. And then every step forward is dissecting that bigger picture, because you've got an option. You've got an option when you've got your plot and you've got your idea, and you're like, I want to tell this story. Now, I can either utilize these tools and let this story grow and mature like a fine wine, or I can ignore those tools and just draw it in crayon. You know, that's how it works for me. That's just how I see it. And I think a lot of that is, I'm going to say something that's probably going to be controversial for some movie fans out there. You've got Blade Runner, right? Now, not everyone likes Blade Runner. I'm someone who does. To me, Blade Runner is a beautiful oil painting. If I could put Blade Runner, the whole of Blade Runner into one image, it would be this beautiful oil painting that someone's taken time to structure and care about. And then you've got The Fifth Element, which is the same painting done in crayon. That's how it comes across to me, and that's how I look at story and in using structure. I want to get to that oil painting. I don't want to get to that drawing in crayon.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, to me, it sounds like, I think what's the most natural way to do story is this whole idea of, have you read the book Invisible Ink?
No, I haven't.
Okay, it's a good book. If you have like Audible, it's on there too. But you know, there's this whole idea of like kind of two ways to approach story. One would be, at least this is how I think of it, two different ways. One would be kind of like, you know, you get a big block of clay, and then you cut away and cut away and cut away, and you create, you know, the Statue of David, you know?
Yeah.
Or then there's the other way where, so there's one that's like subtractive and one that's additive, and there's one, you know, where you get the armature and you've got, you know, all the proportions you need, you got the armature, and then you start adding some clay here and there, and eventually you get to the point where you have the Statue of David, you know? So it's like there's two different ways, and one, to me, sounds like the one with the armature is like a more efficient way. The one with the you know, with the big hunk of clay is a less efficient way, but it's also, I feel like, a more natural way in some ways.
Yeah, I think it is a more natural way, but we also have to think when the Statue of David was made, the sculptor, who I can't believe their name is completely gone from my mind right
Isn't
now.
it Michelangelo?
That's what I wanted to say. So when Michelangelo created the sculpture of David,
Could be Leonardo too. We could be like making fools of ourselves right here.
it could have been all four of the Ninja Turtles.
It could have.
We have to
or
accept that as a possibility,
Splinter, too.
that there is a universe out there, a parallel timeline where the Ninja Turtles actually did that, and I want to go there.
Yes.
That's not the point.
I
When he started
think
with that,
that's the plus comic book.
yeah, when he started with that block of clay, or stone or marble, whatever, do you think that he just went tink 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 and got it perfect, or do you think he went tink tink? Damn it! I took too much off. Start again. Get me a new fresh block of clay, or marble, or stone, or whatever it's made out. It could be made out of.
I know.
cement.
I think it was marble. I don't know why I said clay.
And to me, that's an important thing, like, because unfortunately, whether anyone likes it or not, when you're doing this as a job, you've got these wonderful little friends who are also your worst enemies at the same time. They're called deadlines. And especially in comics, one thing, this is something that I think the writers and artists need to or people who want to write and illustrate comic books professionally need to understand. Yes, you're going to hear lots of people on the internet going, you can't use reference photos, that's cheating. No. You can't do this, that's cheating. You can't do that, that's cheating. But the thing is, your editor doesn't care how the page was made. They care about whether the page was good or not. Because they're putting themselves into the mindset of the majority of readers. When a reader picks up a comic book and looks at that first page, do you really think they're sat there going, well, he clearly used reference there, therefore I'm not going to buy this issue of Batman?
Only I would do that as an artist.
Yeah, fellow artists might. But at the end of the day, you've got a choice. You can either do it without the reference photos, without any digital aids or whatever, without 3D models, and miss the deadline and not be able to pay your bills. Or you could get out of your own way and just go, come hell or high water, by this deadline, this book's going to be done. And when it is, it goes out there and people sell it and buy it, and they enjoy it, and all of a sudden you're going, "Oh, I'm not going to have my house repossessed." Brilliant. So, you know, I'm a big fan of get the hell out of your own way. So
it's interesting.
So yeah, I mean, I get what you mean. It does sound like the sculpture, the digging into the marble or the stone. It definitely does sound like a more natural way. To me, that sounds like how a pantser would write a story, and the other one sounds like how the plotter would write a story.
Yeah, definitely. That's pretty much the distinction.
Yeah, and I think there's benefits to both sides of plotting and pantsing at the end of the day. I mean, even people like Stephen King, there was an interview I saw of his where they asked, like, does he structure it, does he outline his novels? And he said, but if I do that, then I already know the ending. I don't want to know the ending, because if I know the ending, then the reader's going to know the ending as well. So he's someone who is a self-proclaimed pantser, and I wouldn't say he's doing badly.
No, I don't think so. It's interesting because you know, there's also people who swear by knowing the ending, you know, that's the only way to do it. And they would say, some people, you know, which is crazy that I don't like to say anything is the only way you can do anything, but that is how some people put it.
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in what Friedrich Nietzsche said when he said, there's your way, there's my way, and the right way, the only way, the correct way just doesn't exist. And I feel that's definitely true when it comes to storytelling. Because, I mean, bear in mind, I've gone on about, like, the lock system, the story embryo, the monomyths, the idea of creating a super monomyth and character arcs. And yeah, I use all of those on almost every single story I tell, unless it's a short story, obviously. But I still get to a point where I go, yeah, but it makes more sense if I switch this plot point around with this plot point here. Or maybe just take this plot point out, because do I really need it? This is the C story, does it really need to be that detailed? And adding in little plot points and stuff as well. So it's not a... See, that's the other thing. Until it's in print or up on your website for people to read, until it's public, nothing is set in stone.
Yeah.
It's all tools to try and help you create the best story that you can. Sometimes that's going to be by guesswork, by just diving in head first and hoping for the best. Other times it's going to be looking in that toolkit and going, okay, well, here's Vogler's monomyth, I'm going to use that to help me structure something.
Yeah, it's interesting. And like we talked about it before. You know, I've been kind of reading. I kind of stopped because I don't have time to read, but I want to get back into it. Is the Story Genius book? Yeah, and you know, again, it's another, and Invisible Ink is what got me on this kind of path of, you know, working first with an armature and then adding instead of subtracting, and you know, I think I like the idea because it's more efficient, and I guess my goals are all about like getting as many stories out as possible. Like I especially, you know, as I'm getting older, I want to make this into something, you know, worthwhile. Yeah. But at the same time, the thing that slows me down a little bit is this idea of creating stories being a big responsibility. I don't think of it as a light thing. I think a lot of people, you know, they just kind of go into it and don't realize that these things will kind of influence people. So that kind of slows me down a little bit. But I still want to just put out as much things as I can. And, I don't think I'm gonna like write anything that's gonna be horrible anyways. So
No, that's my job.
there you go. But I don't know. But the story genius method throws plot all out the window. Don't even think about plot. It's gonna be there, whether you try or not. Like, and this whole like writing a huge, bad first draft, as they say, is and then kind of cutting away. That's like she would probably be kind of totally against that. And I think it's interesting because she focuses on what she believes the core of a story is, and she would say plot actually isn't story. That's just things that happen. There's no story in that. What story is it's the inner misbelief, the inner journey that the main protagonist goes through, and there's also all these other characters, and they all have kind of their journey as well. But it all serves, if you're writing one story, it's best to have it all serve the main protagonist's storyline. So that it's that inner journey, that inner struggle. The way she tends to put it is, it's a misbelief, which is actually the same thing as a belief, but it's just wrong. And it's that misbelief playing against the desire that character has. So it's like, I want to have a career in comics, but I don't believe it's possible. That kind of thing. That would be like my thing.
That would be a huge misbelief.
So it's like that, and then but you still desire it so much that you're gonna either try to go for it or you're gonna be pushed into it. There might be outside forces where that's where plot would come in. That like plot is used to serve moving the characters forward. It's a device in story, and then you come to this point of change, which tends to be when people talk about what is story, they often talk about this point of change towards the end, and that's where you kind of overcome your misbelief and either believe something new, or in some stories you actually solidify what you believed, and
absolutely,
it's kind of a whole different way of going about it. But that would be where she would say the core of story is in all the plot, and everything else needs to serve that, and that's the power like of a story.
And she's not wrong. She's not wrong whatsoever. But the whole idea of the character's misbelief, and that being a part of their character arc, because that's what that really is a part of, is character arcs. And the change, the overcoming of the misbelief, well, that's just looking at one character arc. That's looking at a positive change character arc, which we see in a lot of stories. But it doesn't allow for the flat character arc, which we also see in a lot of stories. I mean, Batman Begins has a flat character arc. Captain America, The Winter Soldier, and Civil War, these are both films that have a flat character arc, where the character believes in a truth from the very beginning instead of a misbelief. So I think what you're describing to me is she's trying to do a similar thing to me, where you're trying to create that interchangeable monomyth, like a super monomyth, that you can go to for the majority of your stories, and you don't have to work through it and then go, now I need to add this in, and now I need to take that out. Which is understandable, because at the end of the day, you want to be as efficient as possible. But my only quibble with that is, one of the reasons why I like doing a first draft is because you have so many happy accidents. So many little accidents that you really do want to keep. You also have some not so happy accidents that you desperately want to cut out. And if you don't go through a first draft, second draft, or third draft, then you miss the opportunity of discovering those happy accidents. But that's just my personal opinion at the end of the day.
Now, do you feel like you, because there's also, the whole concept of, cutting out your babies or whatever.
Killing your
Like,
darlings, yeah.
yeah, so like, do you run into that? Like, to me, that would be the temptation. You might end up leaving in some stuff that is unnecessary and actually harms the plot.
It depends on whether you're letting your ego drive your storytelling or not. If you're letting your ego drive your storytelling, then everything is gold and nothing needs to be taken out. But no one's perfect. And
Well, I think it's more subtle than that, though, because like, I think, ego it's kind of a tricky bastard. Like,
oh yeah,
like even if you try to subdue the ego, it creeps in,
yeah. Oh, absolutely. I've found myself doing it many times before, where I'm like, I'm only keeping that in to please my ego. And my ego is my enemy right now. You got to do what's best for the story, so take that line out, kind of thing. You have to learn that, like, that self-discipline, not like a super harsh self-discipline where you go, you're scum, you're nothing, you'll never write anything good, but enough to go, look, you've got a win here, so take a loss here, kind of thing. And I am a big fan of killing my darlings, which, if we take that out of context, that makes me sound real bad. But I do generally like it. I mean, I was working on what was intended to be a short story and became more of a novella. A little story called Marbles. Now, you'll have to forgive me if I spoil my own story, especially as I haven't had it published yet. That will be soon.
Right.
But basically, it all started with me having a weird idea. Because a lot of the time, I'll sit there and I'll come up with a concept or an idea. Something like Skin and Bones that I mentioned earlier, which is a little silly. But then I'll also come up with something like Emerald Witch, which is a graphic novel that I'm working on now, and that's a very serious kind of story. And every now and then, my brain will go, "Now you could work on that serious story. You could work on that serious story. That's a roller coaster that'll make people laugh and cry and go at certain moments. Or we could do the really ridiculous story that no one's going to appreciate whatsoever." And that idea is always the most appealing for some reason. So I had sat there and I'd thought to myself, how funny would it be? And I say funny for me, maybe not everyone else. If I started a story where you've got say a little 8-year-old boy who's in a garden and he's digging a hole or something, or he's playing with like his G.I. Joe figures and whatever. He's just having a good Saturday afternoon in the garden. And then his dog trots up to him and he's like, "Oh, hey, Sparky, what do you think we should do today?" And then his dog looks at him and says, "Kill the president." And I just thought that would be so funny to do. So I wrote that in my little story bank book and thought, I'll work on that one day. And the day came around. And I was like, that could be a funny short story. That would be worth exploring. And I sat there and I went, okay, there's a big problem with this. There's a couple of big problems with this. One, if the kid says no to the idea of this dog saying kill the president, and bear in mind, I wanted it to be that the dog could only say those 3 words. So whenever it spoke, it was just constantly going, kill the president, kill the president. And
I am Groot.
Yeah, basically.
Kill the president.
Basically. And I thought, funny. The 8-year-old boy is going to very quickly say, "No, Sparky, that's not what I meant. Like, let's play Twister or something." So there's no real journey. Plus, the 8-year-old boy isn't going to leave his house by himself, depending on the parents, obviously. But most likely, he'll turn around to the parents and go, "Mum, could you drive me to the White House? I need to kill the president." And what mother is going to hear that and go, "Yeah, sure, fine, let me go get a rifle for you." Right, so there's loads of big problems there. And I didn't like recognizing these problems, but I had to very quickly go, okay, we need to cut bits out and just put... And this is just the concept stage.
Yeah.
And I ended up going, okay, well, the age of the boy is one of the biggest problems. It still needs to be someone who's at school, because it's more interesting. If it happens to an adult, they're just going to think, wow, what drugs am I on? There's nothing too interesting there. It needed to be a certain age. So I changed his age to 16. And I thought to myself, regardless of age, if any dog says to you, kill the president, and you go, yeah, all right then, you're not going to get very far. Doesn't matter who you are, you're not going to get very far in that journey. You're going to leave your house and probably get stopped there by the FBI or whatever. So I thought, does he need to say kill the president? Or could he say something else? And then I got to the point where I was like, okay, so the concept is there's a kid, a 16-year-old high schooler, whose dog has just spoken to him for the first time, and his dog has said, kill them all. So why would the dog say that to him? And all of a sudden, this idea of a funny story about an 8-year-old trying to kill the president because his dog told him to, turned into this story about this bullied high schooler who's gone through some really harsh times, and the bullying's really violent. Like, it's got to the point where the bullies have attacked him and they gave him a concussion, and his father, who's a single parent and a lawyer, he can only look at his child's bullying in the terms of, can we take them to court? Can we sue them or sue the parents? And he's working that way, and the kid's thinking, I don't want to sue them. I want the bullying to stop. I don't want them to hurt me anymore, and I don't want them to hurt others. No one's listening to me. And he sits down with his dog that he's had for 10 years and says, Sparky, I know this is useless because you don't even understand what I'm saying, but here are my problems. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? And then the dog turns around and says, kill them all. And the story expands from there, turning a bullied high schooler into the monster he fears. I could say more than that, but it would really spoil the ending. And that's the thing. When I had that idea, I thought, excellent, I'm going to write this story and I'm going to be laughing all the way through writing it. And then it ended up being a story where I got to the end and I was like, oh my God, it's so sad. Oh. So,
wow.
And I'm so proud of how it turned out, and it wouldn't have turned out that way if I didn't cut and change things and just went, no, it must be this, because my ego says it must be this.
Yeah. It is interesting, the kill the president thing, but yeah, that what you're saying kind of... See, I was thinking of a different route to go, but that's where the... you could have the same idea and two creators are going to do something totally different.
Absolutely.
But I was thinking like it could be more like this kid, like he always does what he's told to do. Like he has a problem in that way. Like he won't stand up when it's time to stand up because he'll do what he's told to do. So, will he even do something as absurd as his dog telling him, to kill the president or whatever? And you could kind of build the story out from there somehow. Yeah. And at the end he would overcome by finally, and it would be a pressure because he would tell maybe his parents or something, this is what the dog said. Like, look, he's saying he's going to say it. And the dog obviously is never going to say it around anybody else. But then, later on, the dog is just going to continue to say, kill the president, kill the president. And I don't know, maybe at the end he kills the dog or something. I don't know.
That's a possibility. Or you could even take it in the direction of you start it making the reader believe that this is an innocent story of a kid that's discovered his dog can talk. It's just, unfortunately, the dog really wants the president to die. And then halfway through, you turn it into a story about how an 8-year-old is turning completely insane. Which I really shouldn't be laughing about, but there is something funny about this 8-year-old turning into the tiniest little psychopath and losing his mind completely.
That's so funny. That's crazy. So, is that the short story you just put up on your site? Is that what you're...
No, the one I just put up on my site is called Snapshot. and it deals with the idea of. I don't know if you've ever had this on social media at all, but I've had it a few times where, like, you could post a status saying, "Oh man, I've been at this convention or something, and this happened." Like, maybe you met one of the celebrities, or a terrorist attack happened, something. I don't know. And you always get that person that goes, "Photos," or "It didn't happen."
Yeah.
Now, my thought is, a photo can be manipulated in Photoshop anyway. So I could make it look like it happened if it didn't. But I know it happened because I was there. Also, when have you ever known a camera to capture the point that you wanted it to capture? So I took that idea, and it's a little bit of a dark story, I will say. It's basically a short story about a married couple who the wife believes that the husband has been cheating on her, so she's hired a private investigator to follow him around and get a few candid snapshots. And we start the story with her staring at a manila envelope in her kitchen whilst her husband's rushing about upstairs. He's having a shower and this, that and the other, and she's thinking to herself, he must be cheating on me because I saw the scratch marks on his neck. I saw him having that hidden phone conversation that he didn't want anyone to know about and stuff. But I'm too scared to open it. And then she goes, "No, I've got to. And she opens it, and she realized, and it's photographs of her husband cheating on her in the most intimate of acts with a guy in an alleyway. And she thinks, "Oh my God, he's actually gay, and he couldn't come to me about it." And she's having these conflicted emotions. And she ends up confronting him and showing him the photos, and he's like, "Oh no." She's like, "So here's your moment. Here's the olive branch. Tell me, who is this young man that you've been having an affair with, and this, that, and the other, and why did you feel it necessary to cheat on me?" And he keeps pleading his innocence, going, "Actually, I didn't cheat on you." And she's like, "But the evidence is there." And it ends with the police turning up and arresting him for rape. And she looks at the photographs again and realizes he was telling the truth when he said he didn't have an affair. So it's it's that little thing of, oh my God, what am I actually looking at? Like, how good are photographs as evidence anyway? And it all spawns just from someone going, "Photographs," or "It didn't happen."
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's
it sounds like a good. Have you seen that show Black Mirror?
I love Black Mirror. I haven't seen the 4th season yet, but I love Black Mirror.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either, but that sounds like something that would be on that show.
Oh yeah, that show can get pretty dark sometimes. There's another there's another British anthology show called Inside Number 9, and it takes a more dark humor approach. But man, it gets really dark. It's up there. If you like Black Mirror, you will love Inside Number 9.
Interesting. Is that like on Netflix or something, or do you know? Or?
I don't know if it's on Netflix. Because it's the BBC that makes Inside Number 9, so it's probably on their demand service. But usually, after a season's aired, it very quickly goes to DVD and the other streaming services. So you should be able to find it. If not on Netflix, it must be on something like Hulu or somewhere like that.
What did you say it's called?
Inside Number 9.
Okay, I have to check that out.
The running theme in all the episodes is the story always takes place either behind a door or close to a door with the number 9 on it.
Interesting.
And that's the only link that they all have. And like, a couple of them are really funny, a couple of them are really heartbreaking. Get the tissues ready, because there's going to be some crying. And other ones are just horrifying.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, it sounds like it's up my wife and I's alley. That's kind of brings up something interesting, though. Is this idea of surprise in stories? Like,
yes.
I feel like for some, I don't know if it's really for everybody, but like, I know for myself, it's like always something. I feel like that's what I'm looking for, and once I found that, I'm like, okay, I have the seed of a story.
Yeah.
And I know, like, with my 12 stories, I can't help but think like all of these are going to turn into some weird, like, Alfred Hitchcock thing, because
Hey, that's not a bad
for some
thing.
reason, my mind just always goes there, But I mean, you don't have to have surprising stories, but does that seem to be kind of where you go all the time, often too?
What I look for, and I don't mind whether it comes via a surprise or just letting a story play out, is when the reader or the viewer comes to the end of the story, I want them to have one of three reactions. I want them to either be like, oh, my mind is blown, I am in a position of awe, I feel seriously disturbed because of it, but I feel like my mind has been opened up to so many new things. That's one thing that I'd like them to feel. If they don't feel that, then I'm quite happy for them to get to the end of a story and go, oh my god, that was so beautiful. Get the tissue, sir. Or, the one that I really like to go for is I want them to feel both at the same time. I want them to be like, it's so beautiful, but horrifying and disgusting. To me, that can come in so many different ways. I mean, once again, I'm probably going to spoil one of my own stories here that you can read on my website. A short story I did called Desperate Times. And that's a story that definitely has a surprise, and it's basically you're in a shopping mall. Sorry, it takes place at a shopping mall on Christmas Eve, and everyone's rushing about and getting the last minute presents and stuff. But a crowd has formed on the bottom floor of this shopping mall, and it's all these people going, "Oh, is he okay? Is he all right? Is he bleeding? Is this, that, and the other?" And there's a guy in a suit just led on his side. Just led there, a bit like the Radiohead music video, Creep. He's just led on the floor and no one knows why. And he seems okay, but he won't get up, he won't talk to anyone. So the paramedics are called in, just in case it's a serious emergency. And these two paramedics turn up. And one of them kneels down and is sort of like, hello, sir, can I help you? Is everything okay? And he's like, oh, piss off. I don't want you here. Just leave me alone. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not doing anything wrong. And she tries to solve the problem, but she doesn't really know what the problem is. So she decides to lie down in front of him and basically mirror the position that he's in to try and find out why he's lying down on the floor. And that's when she notices that his ear that's closest to the floor, there's a little blue flash of a Bluetooth headset. And he starts to cry and go, look, they told me to do this because if I don't, they're going to kill my daughter. It's her 5th birthday today. And she goes, okay, who are they? And he goes, I can't tell you who they are, but now you know that they exist. They want you to do something for them, otherwise they will kill my daughter. And she's like, okay, well, what do they want me to do? And it all ends with him saying 3 words, send more paramedics. And to me, that's a surprise. And that's where the impact of the story comes from. That's the punch, the knockout that we talked about earlier. But at the same time, look at movies like, Captain America Civil War. I thought that was a fantastic movie. I don't remember there really being a twist or a surprise. It was, like I said, a flat character arc, a normal hero's journey, for want of a better phrasing. But it was all about just letting a situation play out and seeing where that situation went. And I got to the end of that movie and it blew me away. I was like, wow, I did not expect it to be that good. So, no, I think about how I want the reader to feel at the end of the story. And to me, that will dictate whether there should be a surprise, a twist, a reveal, or whether it's just a case of let's let things play out and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. There's so many routes you could take, so many ways you can approach it, and think we've definitely gone through a few of them, a pretty good deal of them, and yeah, it's super interesting. I'm so excited to like continue along this journey and get to the point where I feel like I'm writing the kind of stories, and creating the kind of stories that I want to tell and stuff. So, it's definitely been great talking to you about this. It always is interesting to hear your thoughts on these things.
It's been awesome being part of your podcast. Thank you for having me on this. This is actually like my first podcast, like someone else's podcast that I've been on. So this has been awesome.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's surprising. Cool. Well, I'm, honored that it is. So yeah, I mean, and thank you for recording my own podcast for me.
You're very welcome.
If you guys, people listening, we were supposed to record this. Let's see, now it's we're supposed to start at 10, right? So that's like 3 hours ago.
Yeah, about that.
And we spent a lot of time just trying to make Google Hangouts work, and it just didn't want to play nice with us. So.
No, I think it hates me, to be honest with you. It's cool with you, it loves you, but me, no, it doesn't like the English guy with the funny accent.
I don't know. I don't get it, but I think tomorrow we could try it and it'll work. It's so weird because we did have a conversation before on it and it worked. So I don't get it. It's weird, but anyways, somehow, some way, we found out how to have a conversation, and hopefully it recorded correctly and we can post it. So. So just kind of signing out. Let's just remind people once again where they can find you and your work.
You can find me at my website, which is fwaystorm.co.uk. You can find me on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. You can just type in Fwah Storm, and you'll find me eventually.
Yeah, you have a pretty unique name, so I think, it won't be hard for people to find it.
Absolutely, and the good thing about my name is I know that if my career goes downhill and a job opening for superhero or rock star comes up, I've got the best name for it, so I've got a foot in already.
There you go. That works out. All right, man. So definitely thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for checking out this once a year podcast. And and hopefully there'll be more to come soon. Now I have to do, I can't just end at 99. So I have to at least do one more to make it 100. So we'll see what that's going to end up being. But thank you for checking out the Escape Artist podcast. And we will talk to you on the next one. Peace out.